Welcome back, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who I know very well. He's a colleague of mine in the Department of Biomedical Informatics, and also with the Center for Biostats. Dr. David Klein is an assistant professor in BMI at The Ohio State University. He's also a member of the Center for Biostatistics and the Infectious Disease Institute, and co-leads the Population Health Informatics and Biostatistics Lab. Dr. Klein's research is focused on developing biostatistical methodology to overcome challenges in public health surveillance and address key problems in population health and epidemiology. In particular, he is focused on developing multivariate Bayesian hierarchical models for spatial temporal disease mapping that leverage multiple sources of data to address complex, difficult to measure social and epidemiological problems like the opioid epidemic and COVID-19 epidemic. His expertise includes small area estimation, spatial temporal methods, multivariate modeling, and Bayesian methods. And in addition, Dr. Klein applies his biostatistical expertise to a wide variety of collaborative research, as I know very well because I've collaborated with him on a number of projects, with a primary focus on modeling clinical and observational data. So, Dr. Klein, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Guy. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is uncertainty in the response to COVID-19. As a statistician, a large part of my job is to deal with uncertainty and to think about modeling uncertainty. And so I'm going to talk through a pair of situations that have arisen during the COVID-19 pandemic and address how statistical thinking and statistical modeling have been applied to provide additional information and understanding on the pandemic. So a brief outline for the talk this morning. I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction to sort of set the big picture and set the stage. And then, like I said, I'm going to talk through two scenarios that came up and how statistical thinking applied to dealing with them. And the first will be applied to, just sort of general surveillance of COVID-19. And then the other one will be the seroprevalence study that was conducted in the state of Ohio and how we dealt with some challenges there. So we all know this, but it would be inappropriate to start without some sort of acknowledgement of the global crisis that we are in, that we've been in since last year, and that will continue to be in for at least several more months. The global number of confirmed COVID-19 cases when I pulled this yesterday was over 99 million. It's probably closer to 100 million at this point. And we're looking at, over 2 million deaths globally. So this is an enormous crisis, an enormous public health crisis in the world. And I think it's also worth acknowledging. So while I'm going to talk about a work that was done during COVID-19, this has been a really difficult year for lots of people, and it really gives me no pleasure that this work had to be done. While it's something that I've been able to do and there's some academic components to it, just acknowledging that, this has been a challenging time for a lot of people, and it's not really so much of an academic opportunity as an obligation to serve the community and the state of Ohio. So just a big picture, what is disease surveillance? What are we talking about when we think about disease surveillance? So we're talking about the collection, processing, analysis, and interpretation of data to support and inform the control and prevention of disease. So this can involve assessing trends and patterns across space and time. This can think about identifying hotspots and anomalous activity that are occurring so that we can follow up with further kinds of public health and epidemiological investigation to figure out what's going on in those locations. And then there's also a component about communicating risk to policymakers and the public. So that's really the big picture goal of what we're trying to do when we're thinking about disease surveillance in this context. And so what were the goals? As I'll mention in a little bit, I'm part of a team that has been working with the state of Ohio and the Ohio Department of Health and the governor's office on surveillance related to COVID-19 since sort of last spring. And so the way that we were thinking about this and our objectives were to systematically and continuously monitor COVID-19 in Ohio. And to do that, we were producing intelligence reports to inform situational awareness about COVID-19 and sort of where things stood at any given point in time. There's a lot of technical challenges to this. There's a data science component that involves processing, analyzing, visualizing information, translating that information into actionable intelligence. And then there's also a process systems engineering component where we need a process to efficiently interpret information and disseminate it to the right people at the right time. And so this led to a very interdisciplinary effort, and I'll get to the teammates and sort of where they came from. But it's wrong to think about surveillance simply as a data problem, as simply a biostatistics problem or an epidemiology problem. If we're really thinking about the whole process, it's really a multidisciplinary problem because you need to go from the data the whole way through to the policymaker and to action if you're really gonna make an impact. And a key focus of ours throughout all of this was we always wanted to make sure that we were characterizing the confidence, completeness, and context of the data and the information that we were sharing. There's kind of a push as data become more available to just publish raw data, just throw it out there and let people look at it. But without the confidence, completeness, and context, it really doesn't mean much. And you can be misled pretty easily if you don't understand the context of information that's being shown. So just a note about reporting, and this kind of sets the stage for why there are so many challenges related to COVID-19 in the past year. So probable and confirmed cases of COVID-19 are notifiable conditions. They have to be reported to state, local, and national health authorities. Case ascertainment requires so to be a confirmed case, it requires an RNA test. To be a probable case, the definition requires either a healthcare encounter or an antigen test. So what are challenges here? Well, to show up as a case, that means you have to have access to tests. We know there are a lot of mild and asymptomatic cases who may never go seek care. They may never go seek a test because their symptoms aren't that bad. And we know, especially when we were starting out, last March, April, May, access to testing was really constrained. It was a major problem. You really couldn't get a test unless you had just traveled from China or if you had contact with somebody else who tested positive. And the only way they were going to test positive is if they were coming from China. So we were really hamstrung with access to tests and how restrictive that was at the beginning of the epidemic and the outbreak in Ohio and the United States. There's also delays in the system. So at various points in the pandemic, particularly in Ohio and other places, we've seen lab backlogs where we aren't able to get the samples processed in a super timely fashion. We've also strained our public health infrastructure, particularly at the state and local level. These are parts of the public health system that really, frankly, aren't well funded and well staffed. And so to push a lot of the burden of responding to the pandemic on those individuals, it has really stretched those organizations to the brink. And so, particularly when we were seeing, really high case numbers, we were putting a lot of strain on those public health professionals. And then also there's a lack of knowledge because this is a novel infectious disease. We certainly know more now than we knew a year ago, but there's a constant updating of information that occurs. And so we need to be mindful of sort of where the science is. And we also need to be mindful of what is sort of good and reliable science and what is not. And we certainly saw a mix of that as we've progressed through this pandemic with certainly some premature and some poor science that really needed to be disregarded. And then also some really good science that we needed to take into account in our decision making. So that filtering process is also key. And so none of this is an academic discussion. It can kind of sound like one, but people are dying. People have been dying. People are going to continue to die. So we need to make decisions. We need to make the decisions to the best of our ability under the uncertainty that we're presented. And ideally, policy should be informed by data. We shouldn't just be making policy to make policy. We should be using science and data to inform policy and communication to the public. Like I said, there's many unknowns and we're constantly updating. So that can be really difficult for the general public and also for policymakers who don't, have science backgrounds to be able to filter out sort of where the state of knowledge is when it is so rapidly changing as we learn more about COVID-19 and the disease that it causes, that people end up having. And then, of course, this pandemic, it's not only an infectious disease issue and a medical issue, but it also turned into a political firestorm, which really didn't help efforts in controlling and surveilling the pandemic because, we had a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of distrust. A lot of that still remains. And so that just added an extra layer of challenge onto dealing with a novel infectious disease. So data never lie, right? So just show me the data and we can figure out what to do. Well, that's not totally true. So data don't inherently lie, but they don't always reflect what we think they do. And this gets back to what I was saying about context, and context matters a lot. Data are observed within a context and often with error. So we have to understand what that context is. We have to understand what those errors could be. And this has to be acknowledged so that we're not misled. We can't just throw raw data out and expect necessarily that the interpretation is going to be correct. So if I step back, what does this mean in the context of surveillance? Well, let's think about how we get to what we're interested, how we get to what we actually see. So if we think about the ecology of disease, there are all kinds of characteristics in the social environment that lead to that map of true outcomes of interest. So in this case, it's the true incidence prevalence. It's the true marker of COVID-19, whatever you want that to be in this case. However, we never actually observe that. We have to detect those cases. Those cases then have to be reported. So the things that we're seeing on the dashboards and all the other kinds of data presentations, they're not a reflection of the actual COVID-19 because we never see it. To see it, somebody has to go and they have to have access to a test and they have to get that test, and that test has to be positive, and that positive test then has to be correctly reported into the system. And so there's all kinds of
Everyone, looks like Dave may be having some connectivity problems, so we'll just give it a minute and hopefully he can come right back.
Sorry about that. My VPN crashed and killed everything. So I've now shut that off. Okay, so just to sort of pick up where I left off was we have to be cognizant of all these selection factors when we're interpreting data, and that's why the raw data can be misleading sometimes. So jumping into surveillance, like I said, this is a multidisciplinary effort, and here is a collection of the people who have really been core on this effort since really last April. And so you can see, we're coming from a lot of different backgrounds, but we all had unique contributions to this team, and it really made things work. And I think if there's a positive to, some of this pandemic, it's how people who, I've never worked with any of these people before that last year, and how we were able to come together and really do incredible work in a short amount of time to respond to this. So what's the motivation here? So ODH primarily reports cases by onset date. And case-based surveillance is really important. And it's really important in Ohio for a variety of reasons, including it's been some of the primary information around used in informing decision-making and policy. It's also key in risk communication in the Ohio Public Health Alert System. So the indicator 1 in the OFA system is the 2-week case rate. Indicator 2 is whether those cases are increasing. And then there's also a high incidence indicator of whether the incidence rate in the last 2 weeks is above 100 per 100,000. However, there are challenges to doing case-based reporting this way, especially reporting by onset date. And there's reporting delay. That's really the biggest issue. Some of this delay is unavoidable because of the nature of COVID-19. It takes some time from the time that you're infected to show symptoms, from the time that your symptoms show up and get to the point where you need a test, the time to get that test, and then the time for that test to result. So all of that delay adds up between the time when your symptoms started and the time when you actually get the positive test result and it's reported into the system. And some of this delay is attributable to overload because whether it's the lab is overloaded and it takes longer for the test to result, or whether by the time the test results to get processed by the health department and entered into the system. We also have strong day of the week effects, really strong day of the week effects. So there's a lot of variation by day of the week. Almost like clockwork, you could turn on the news on Sunday anytime last year, and there would be a report about how cases were down today, because cases were down every Sunday. So it's really important to think about that daily variation when interpreting what we're seeing. And then there's also a lot of county level variation in case rates and reporting. And in particular, we have small counts and populations in rural counties. So we want to make sure that we're handling them in an appropriate way, and that we're also capturing when there are issues in these places and not just writing it off as, well, that's a really small count. So what's the big picture of what we're going to try to do here? So one way to deal with reporting delays is called nowcasting. And so what you do with nowcasting is we're thinking about estimating counts of events that have already occurred but not yet been observed. So forecasting is thinking about what's going to happen in the future. Nowcasting is saying that these things have already happened. We just haven't seen them, but we want to know sort of where things stand as of today. I'm not going to go into a ton of statistical detail. I'm going to sort of give a high level of the kinds of things that went into this model. So there are two main model components. So there's the case count time series, which is really what you're interested in. What are the case counts over time and how is that moving? And then there's a reporting delay model. So the reporting delay model is how are we getting that information about the case count time series? How long is it taking to populate those counts? And then we have a county level model. And in that model, we're going to leverage small area estimation techniques like hierarchical modeling and spatiotemporal correlation to help stabilize some of those counties that are smaller and borrow some strength from their neighbors. And we also allow for county-specific time-varying reporting processes. And so the point of that is each county has its own health department, and that's who's in charge of reporting. So there should be a county-specific process. And then the time-varying piece allows for sort of, if you get ahead or behind, those things can affect how quickly you're reporting. This is a nice figure from this paper by Van de Castile in 2019 that sort of explains what we're trying to think of here. So in a perfect world, there would be no vertical axis. And so you would think about at time one, at T1, you would see capital N1. That's the outcome that you're interested in. At T2, you would see N2. But that's not really the case here. And that's why we have this vertical axis. So the way you can think about the vertical axis is that in this figure, so at time one, N1 is really broken down into N10, N11, N12, and N13. So we're really seeing N1 over 4 days. Where D is the days beyond T where it already occurred. So N1 all occurred at T1, but we will see that total over the next 3 days broken down. And so that's how we're thinking about this, is there is some total number of cases that occurred at a given time, but we will observe them over some period of days following when they actually occurred. And so what happens is when you get out here, so in this case, capital T would be where time is currently. So time 9 and 10 are completely forecast, which is why they're grayed out. But at time 8, we only see the portion of capital N8 that is reported on that day. And we don't see the next 3 days of reporting that contribute towards that case number. Likewise for 7, we see 7.0 and 7.1, but not 7.2 and 7.3. And so we can use historical patterns in reporting to inform sort of how many remaining cases we expect to still be outstanding. And we can contribute that into our estimate of what N7 or what N8 should be. We also can incorporate knowledge about how this time series is moving. So it's sort of we're blending knowledge about the time series with knowledge about the reporting to characterize where we're at a given time with incomplete reporting. So the way that we're thinking about doing this is using a time series model. We use a Bayesian structural time series with autoregressive, it's an autoregressive state space model. We have a spatial semi-local linear trend and county-specific day of the week effects. The reporting delay model, like I said, varies over space and time, and also has county-specific day of the week effects, since reporting is also a function of the work week to some extent. And that's sort of all I'll say about the details. So what does this look like? So if we look at the state level time series, I mean, this is data as of yesterday. The red line is what's reported. And so you can see in this case, in this series for the state, you can see that the red line plummets basically to 0 at the end of this series because we haven't reported cases that have onset dates of yesterday yet. But the model fits the black line is the posterior mean, the gray is a credible interval. So based on where we expect to be, based on historical patterns, we sort of expect to be around the 5,000 case mark when we're completely reported for today. And that could be as high as 10,000. It could be as low as about 2,500. So, you know, part of this isn't necessarily about staking a flag in the ground and saying, you know, I think there's going to be 5,000 cases today, but it's characterizing where we could be today based on historical patterns so that can be factored into decision making. If you just go to the dashboard, you're just going to see this red line. And so anytime you go to the dashboard, if you look at the most recent past, cases are always declining. Unless we are very, very rapidly increasing, cases are always declining in the most recent time period. And so that's a misleading view of the data, and that's why we want to adjust it with the model. If we look at the 2-week rates, again, so look, you know, the state trend is, you know, there's a gradual slight decrease over the last month. It looks like from our peak in December. But our county level 2-week rates are still very, very high. If we think about the probability of high incidence over the past 14 days, where that's 100 per 100K as defined by the state, the probability that every county is above that is over 90% for each county. So these rates are still very, very high. So while we're seeing some slight declines, we are not out of the woods yet because we still have a lot of infection across the state. Likewise, if we look at county level rate increases estimated from the model that accounts for the reporting delay, again, we can see that there are some gradual declines across the whole state, with the exception of 2 counties in the south here, where the probability of an increase over the last 2 weeks is greater than 70%. But across the state, it's generally looking a little bit better. So why does this matter? Well, if we go back in time to data that were reported as of September 15th, and we calculate whether the case rate is increasing on the left here based on the way that the state calculates indicator 2 in this public health alert system around increasing rates. And September 15th has already happened. We know and it's completely reported or essentially completely reported. So we know the truth of whether there was an increase in case rates at that point in time, and that's in the middle. And so you can see that what's being done and what the state does, they don't adjust for reporting lag in this at all. And so it's a really poor representation of the truth. And when we're thinking about increases in cases, that's an early warning indicator. You're looking at increases because you want to know, is the trend changing? And if so, how do I go do something about it? And so this did a really poor job. But if you look at the model-based estimate that accounts for reporting lag, it does a much better job of capturing what actually happened at that point in time. And if you go back to September 15th, that is arguably the start of the exponential growth that led into our surge in the end of November. And so this matters because if you can get a signal that things are changing, you can act, or you would hopefully act to do something about it. So conclusions that we must recognize that reporting delays exist. Despite the fact that cases haven't been reported yet, these cases have already happened. There's nothing that we can do that will change that. And this is a key. Just because we haven't seen it yet, it's already occurred. So any action, any kind of policy action, any kind of prevention action that we're going to take isn't going to change the fact that those cases have happened. We just haven't seen them. And so that really needs to be factored into public health policy and intervention decisions. You know, it's the idea that, you know, once we took action in the fall we were kind of locked into what hospitalizations and deaths were going to look like for the next month because all those cases had already happened. With a fast moving disease like this, you have to be in front of it and not behind it. And too often in the past year, we found ourselves behind it and we've gotten into trouble. And so reporting delay models can be a useful tool in this process. Again, not so much to stake your flag in the ground as to like what do I predict the number of cases today would be, but to characterize what is the reasonable space of possibilities where we could be at right now based on the past and based on the data that we've seen come in. So these are really important tools to characterize the current situation and the uncertainty around it. I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about the prevalence study, which also deals with some similar issues around the data that are observed aren't quite exactly what we really want to be learning about. Again, this was a big effort by a lot of people from a lot of different disciplines who worked hard to make this happen over the course of July. So the purpose here was to understand how many people in Ohio have been infected. Again, this is important going back to earlier because not all cases have been reported. We had a severe lack of testing at the beginning of the pandemic, and a lot of people were asymptomatic. So we wanted to understand, how many people have been infected across the state since the beginning of the pandemic. The two questions were, what proportion of Ohio adults have had COVID-19 since the beginning? And then also what proportion of adults currently have COVID-19, again, as of July. I'm just going to talk about the past infection part here. So this was a design survey. It was a stratified one-stage cluster sample where the state was stratified into 8 regions. 30 census tracts were randomly selected in each region with probability proportional to size. 5 households were then randomly selected within each census tract. And 1 randomly selected adult was chosen to participate within each selected household. The target total sample size was 1,200. We didn't get there. And this was, again, conducted throughout July. So there's lots of challenges here. And this is really where my role came into play. So first off, we have imperfect tests. So we first have to recognize, again, the observed test result isn't really the thing we're interested in. We're interested in infection status. Test result does not equal infection status. Test result tells us something about infection status, but if it's not a perfect test, if the sensitivity and specificity aren't 1, it's not a direct reflection of infection status. Luckily, there's a long history of methods that have been designed for dealing with imperfect diagnostic tests. So we have ways to deal with this. We were in a very low prevalence situation at the time. Testing positive wasn't really a common outcome. So a lot of methods that are designed around some of these kinds of survey inference are based on asymptotics, and you have to have, they don't work very well in low prevalence situations. So we can be Bayesian and we can do exact inference regardless of what the prevalence is. Again, this is a design survey. With design surveys, you can think about a design-based analysis where you weight outcomes up to the population to be representative. But in this case, what do we weight? We observe a series of test results. That's not really the outcome we're interested in. So what would we weight? It's not clear. So instead, we take a model-based approach and use multi-level regression and post-stratification to get a representative estimate that we can then combine with our imperfect diagnostic test model. We also have high rates of very likely non-ignorable non-response. Non-response was on the order of 80%. So we do some sensitivity analyses with pattern mixture model, with a simple pattern mixture model. So again, these are things that are established to deal with these problems. And then there's also unknown time since infection, which could impact test results. This is just a limitation. There's some evidence that antibodies are detectable for about 3 months, roughly, but this is just a problem that there isn't really a great solution for at the present and is the limitation. So how do we approach this problem? Well, like I said, there are established frameworks for looking at each piece of the problem. And so what we did was we put these all together. So we know how to do analyses of imperfect diagnostic tests. We know how to do model-based survey analysis, and we know how to deal with missing not at random data. So let's put them all together in one model. And within a Bayesian hierarchical framework, this is something that we can do. An added benefit of doing this is that we are able to appropriately account for all of the uncertainty in the problem through our model. So if we break these up into pieces and paste them together, we're not going to appropriately account for all the uncertainty, and our credible intervals in the end are going to be too short. But by doing this all together, we can propagate all of the uncertainty about all of the aspects of the problem through to the end result, which is the appropriate thing to do. So let's think about the test results, which are what we actually see. So what we see really is a draw from a distribution of the probability of the test result being positive given true disease status. And so this conditional probability relates directly to sensitivity and specificity. And so this is the key part of this model, is through some knowledge, some existing knowledge about sensitivity and specificity of the diagnostic tests, we can leverage that to learn about that true disease status D that we never directly observe. And our goal is to really learn about D. We want to know about that true disease status. We don't really care about the test results per se. And so what we do is we use participant disease status to estimate the population prevalence then. So if we were to weight, we would want to weight disease status. But since we don't see it, it's latent, it's unobserved, we can estimate it through a model. And that's going to be Bernoulli with some probability of disease pi. And again, we learn about that disease status D by knowing about the sensitivity and the specificity of the tests that are used. Then through a model-based survey analysis, we use multi-level regression and post-stratification. So very briefly, what that does is it uses a model to estimate means within each stratum. In this case, and so then once you have means within the stratum, you use population estimates in each stratum to create a weighted average to get state level estimates. In this case, our strata were sex and age group. And then one technical detail, you also have to include design factors in the model because you need your selection process to be ignorable so that your inferences are unbiased. And then we use informative priors. So one piece of this is, I've described this in the context of just one test. For past infection, we actually had 3 different antibody tests, 3 different companies, 3 different brands. And so it was like we were inferring about disease status from combining the information in across those 3 tests to infer underlying disease status of the participant. And so we use validation data from the label for those tests to parameterize informative priors about the sensitivity and the specificity of those tests. We had 2 IgG tests and 1 IgM test. So we assume positive dependence between the IgG tests since they're targeting the same antibody. And then we also assumed that prevalence was centered at 3%. And we put 95% of the probability between 0.4 and 18%. One thing, this analysis is done, it was done to inform policy and policymakers. So, using all of the information that we know from both the data that are observed and from our external expert knowledge is important. And it helps us to get the best possible estimate. So, that's part of the justification for using informative priors. Part of it is we need a little bit of information to help identify the model. But the other piece is we really want to integrate all the knowledge that we have about the pandemic into our results. And this is a way that lets us do that in a principled fashion. So the results from this analysis, we ended up with a posterior mean prevalence of 1.3%. Again, this is past infection through July. And so this corresponded to approximately 117,000 adults in the state of Ohio. And at that point, we had about 99,000 reported cases. So you can see that we estimate that the prevalence was in fact higher than the reported case number, but it's not, it's not a huge difference. The 95% credible interval around that estimate was 0.2 to 2.7%. And these differ slightly from what was presented on the ODH website because we've since accommodated some missing data that was not accommodated in the initial estimates that were provided to ODH. Again, the raw data never lie, right? Except when they kind of do. If we had just assumed any positive test reflects prior infection, the crude estimate of prevalence from that would have been 5.8%, which is very, very different than what we estimated. The reason for this is if you look at the probability of the estimated probability of infection, most participants in the study have a very, very low probability of infection. In fact, most of the positive test results from participants in the study don't agree. There's very, very little agreement across the tests. So that reduces the credibility in those test results. And in fact, based on the number of people that we tested and the specificity characteristics of the test, it's not unreasonable that they all could have been false positives. It would have been within the realm of what might have been expected as false positives based on the test characteristics and the number of people tested. And that's why it's really important in low prevalence settings when we're screening a population that you account for the test characteristics in the analysis. And just very quickly, the current model is unbiased, assuming missing at random given region, track, and strata. However, this is really unlikely. And there are lots of reasons that I don't have time to go into why this is probably not likely. But we used a simple pattern mixture model, which lets us look at the sensitivity of results between assumed relationships between the prevalence in the non-responders and the responders. And so we vary a relative risk between those prevalences and look at how that would have changed our results. And so you can see, even if we say that the non-responders would have been 3 times more likely to have been infected in the past, we're still looking at an upper bound on the credible interval that's about 7%. And so as far as the policy conclusions, this is still pretty low prevalence. So really, the overall practical conclusions don't change, even with a pretty extreme example of 3 times more likely infection in the non-responders. So in conclusion, it's important to have population estimates of past prevalence so we can have an idea of sort of how much COVID-19 has spread throughout the population in the state. We needed methods to overcome challenges related to imperfect tests, low prevalence, and the fact that we were using a design survey to get a population estimate. And then the real big takeaway is that prevalence in Ohio was low and far from herd immunity. And so that's really the big key. Even with the sensitivity analyses, we were nowhere near the kinds of infection levels that we would needed to have had to have herd immunity. So it kind of took that off the table and said we needed to really still stay the course in doing our prevention activities and non-pharmaceutical interventions and things like that to prevent disease. So with that, I'll wrap up. Thanks for listening. I apologize for the VPN crashing, causing a slight delay, but glad I was able to get back on and finish up. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. That was a really interesting talk, actually, about the modeling challenges in disease surveillance and prevalence, and the importance of accounting for the different aspects that you mentioned, like reporting delays, to get useful leading indicators of emerging disease hotspots. And again, to see this kind of cross-cutting theme across all the talks about the importance of partnerships and team science, and including transdisciplinary experts like yourself to to address these challenges during the pandemic, because without your expertise involved, it's clearly that like you said, the data don't lie, except when they do. If the modeling is not done appropriately to account for how the data were obtained and limitations of the data, then you can get some misleading numbers. And again, I'm going to encourage everyone to send questions through the Q&A and chat. I'm going to open up with one question that I had, which is somewhat self-serving too, and for other people may be interested. I am curious now that we're transitioning over from a disease surveillance prevalence, and now everyone's getting vaccinated, and the vaccine data is coming. And you know, do you have plans then to kind of continue this modeling to look at vaccination rates? And is there a possibility to address questions that are on everyone's mind? Like, for instance, if I get vaccinated and then sometime later I show some symptoms like that are COVID-19 related, you know, do I go and get a test for COVID-19 at that point? And I don't know if a population modeling that you're doing can shed some light on that, but I'd be really curious to know if it can be used as a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. So as far as the getting a test question, that would be more of a clinical question. I'm not going to have a great answer on that one. As far as vaccine data, yes, that's, you know, to the extent that it's being collected and that it's reliable. There are opportunities to also integrate that into sort of the framework, the surveillance framework. You know, I didn't talk about it, but the surveillance system that we've set up for ODH incorporates a lot of different sources and streams of data. And so this would just be an add-on to that. I would argue, and our team would argue, that as vaccinations start to take hold, surveillance is going to be even more important, much like it was at the beginning. You know, right now, everything's kind of on fire still. And so it's not really hard to find cases. You just need to, you know, open your eyes and you find cases. Once we get higher rates of vaccine penetration, then it's going to be back into a more of a search and find kind of mode, where you're going to see hotspots and things pop up in communities, and you're going to want to be able to detect them quickly and then react and respond with some kind of intervention to mitigate that from getting worse. So it should actually become more important as we move along and try to mitigate any kind of you know, remaining flare-ups from getting out of control.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So thank you for staying involved and helping out with that. I think it's all really important information for us to know as consumers, and also just this personal, you know, knowledge that we all look at these websites and because it impacts all of our daily lives. So I'm going to hand off. So thank you very much, Dave, for giving a talk. It was a great talk, and we really appreciate your time. And now I'm going to hand off the torch to Dr. Sarah Moore, I believe, is going to do introductions for our panelists discussion.
Great, thanks guys. So it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our next session this morning, Dr. Cynthia Gerhardt. Dr. Gerhardt holds the Janet Ortung Morrow, MD, and Grant Morrow III, MD, Endowed Chair in Pediatric Behavioral Health. And she is the director for the Center for Biobehavioral Health at the Abigail Wexner Research Institute at Nationwide Children's Hospital. She's also a professor of pediatrics and psychology at The Ohio State University. She's an expert in family adjustment to stress, particularly life-threatening illnesses like childhood cancer. And she's been actively involved in the mentoring of students, trainees, and faculty for over 20 years. So with that, I introduce Dr. Cynthia Gerhardt.
Sarah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, I am really pleased that we have time for this panel during the annual scientific meeting. We want to talk a little bit about the impact of the COVID impact on faculty and postdocs. And I just wanted to share some of my personal experience. You know, when all of this happened last year, in March, I personally had my lab shut down. I was working from home, caring for a 6th grader who was on remote schooling, and in-laws who are in their 80s, and my husband also lost his job in the mix of this. And so it was challenging for sure. And the thought occurred to me that, you know, in a lot of ways I was really lucky because my career was already established. I had a great lab and we were financially secure as a family. But I was having ongoing conversations with faculty members and trainees at Nationwide Children's and at OSU as well, and realizing that there was potential to lose a whole generation of talented scientists because of the disruption that this has caused in their careers. And we keep saying and we keep hearing that we're all in this together, but I also had a quote that stuck with me that said, you know, we're all weathering the same storm, but we're definitely not in the same boat. And so today, I was really pleased to be able to invite some really wonderful speakers to share their experiences, both as junior faculty and trainees at OSU and NCH, but also with some of our leaders at both institutions to talk about how we can better support our faculty and trainees through the COVID pandemic. So first, I'd like to introduce Marcelo Pereira, and I'll have to say my Portuguese accent is not going to do his name justice. But Marcelo is a postdoc in the Dean Lab at Nationwide Children's, and he studies the role of natural killer cells in pediatric oncology. He has a master's degree in immunology and a PhD in molecular and cellular biology from the University of Sao Paulo. And he shared that he is different from other Brazilians. He's not a huge soccer fan, but he loves basketball and football instead. He loves to cook for his wife, Gabby, and friends, and they have a 2.5-month-old little girl named Liz who was born during the pandemic. And he's also has 2 godsons that he cares quite deeply for. So he will provide some of the postdoc perspective and what it's like as an international student who came to Columbus in February of 2019. So he had a full year of normalcy before COVID hit during his training. I also want to introduce Dr. Ariel Sheftal. She's a principal investigator in the Center for Suicide Prevention and Research at the Abigail Wexner Research Institute, also at NCH. She's an assistant professor, and her program of research really looks at early risk factors associated with youth suicidal behavior. She's currently funded by the National Institute of Mental Health and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and she's also the mom of 2. And then third, we have Janessa Winston, who's also an assistant professor in the Department of Veterinary Clinical Sciences at OSU. She is a small animal internal medicine veterinarian and a scientist, and she's really interested in how the gut microbiome impacts health and disease, both in animal and human studies, I learned. She's a member of the OSU Center for Microbiome Executive Advisory Board, and she serves as director of the Companion Animal Fecal Bank. And she's currently conducting some research looking at the clinical utility of fecal microbiota transplant to accelerate weight loss in dogs. And Janessa is also a mama too, a new little one that was also born during the pandemic. So I'm really pleased to have our junior faculty joining us and our trainees today. And then I also wanted to introduce 2 panelists who are from leadership both at OSU and at Nationwide Children's. Dr. Dennis Durbin is professor of pediatrics, and he is our chief scientific officer at the Abigail Wexner Research Institute. And he oversees the operations of the Research Institute and provides broad faculty development and support to the nearly 150 faculty that are conducting a broad portfolio of research at our institution. He's also deeply involved in mentoring and has been for a long time in his career. He's mentored over 30 trainees and junior faculty to become physician scientists. He has many now that are thriving in independent faculty research careers. And I will say, in collaboration with a master facilitator, Emma Meager, he's overseeing the development and implementation of the research mentoring training program at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine when he was at CHOP. They've developed new content for the curriculum and really focused on work-life balance and integration. And nearly 100 faculty have participated in that training, which is quite impressive. And then lastly, but not least, we have Dr. Tanya Obereisen, who is a professor and vice chair for academic affairs in the College of Medicine. She has an endowed professorship in pathology and joined the department in 2001 as an assistant professor. So she spent most of her career at OSU. She is, as I said, Vice Chair of Academic Affairs since 2010, and her research, which has been funded by NCI since 1998, as well as the American Cancer Society and other pharmaceutical companies. She's served as a mentor and advisor to numerous students, as well as fellows and junior faculty over her career. And she has, outside of the College of Medicine, served as the senator in the OSU Senate and the OSU Faculty Council member. She served as presidential appointee to the Ohio State Research Committee, as well as on the Research Misconduct Policy Working Group. And she's an active member of the FAME Mentoring Committee, the Executive Women Advisory Group to WIMS, and the executive sponsor for the WIMS Data Subcommittee, which I'll share a little bit about some of the data that's come out of that today. So those are long introductions for our very prestigious panel we have today. But I wanted them to talk a little bit about themselves as well. As you all have probably been hearing, in addition to anecdotal reports based on your own experiences and your colleagues, we are continuing to see data and papers coming out indicating that COVID has been a particularly challenging time for academics and particularly for women and our faculty and trainees of color or from underrepresented groups. And for just some examples of some of the data that's coming out, we had a survey of over 4,500 US and European scientists that show work hours have decreased from 61 to 54 hours per week among our faculty. Women faculty actually had a greater decrease in research time than men, and we see that more pronounced in women who have children younger than 5. The data also show that first author papers among women declined 44% in 2020 relative to 2019. So these are just a few of the data that shows the impact on productivity, particularly for women and those who have children. We also see that there's been a disproportionate awarding of COVID funding and involvement in COVID research for men versus women. Men have led 80% of the COVID task force. They are more likely to get COVID funding, as I mentioned, and women have 19% fewer COVID papers that have been coming out. And then in a survey of our own faculty and staff by the President and Provost Council on Women, we find that the majority, 71% of our OSU faculty who reported in this survey had less time for research. About 60% were concerned about their productivity, and a similar number experienced an increased workload due to other teaching responsibilities, converting to remote teaching and supporting their students who are dealing with the pandemic. So given all of these indicators, I thought it was really timely that we also have some discussion about how this has affected our faculty and trainees, but also what are the institutions doing to help support our faculty and trainees. So Marcella, or Ariel, and Janessa, I'd like to start first with some of your personal stories because I found these were really compelling. I know you all do somewhat different types of research. Some of you are bench to animal to human kinds of research. I'd like you to each tell us a little bit about how COVID has affected your research and your lab and how your productivity has been. So actually, I'd like Marcelo, if you can you start us off with the postdoc view?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. Can you guys hear me properly? So So yeah, it was very challenging this time uh, for during the COVID, but as personal was a personal adventure. So as Cynthia mentioned, so really in the beginning of the pandemic, first week I think that we shut down all the labs. Me and my wife, we figured out that we were pregnant. So, and then I did share with Cynthia that I have a really optimistic point of view. My glass is always half full, so I'm trying to live my life in this way. So it was good because in this way I could be with my wife during this time, during the entire pregnancy, or at least during the full full time during the 2 first months. Uh, so it was really good. She was really sick, so I could be beside her, and because it's just two of us here, was really supportive to be beside her during this time. So um, for for the perspective of lab things, so I think that for us was really good because the center came up with a really good strategy, especially coming from Dean. Dean decided to split our lab in 2 shifts. We had a morning shift and afternoon shift. We have a pretty large group. I think we are 12 in the beginning of the pandemic, and then now some of the fellows they are not part of. They're not that much time in the lab, spending that much time in the lab anymore. So and then but we still are a big lab. So we ended up doing this. So I'm not morning person, but I ended up being the morning shift from 8 to 2. But was good because after that I could be at home with my wife. So this during the time that we start to do experiments, right? But then before was good for us because as you guys are PIs as well, probably you guys have some papers that still you need to put this out. And then Dean also had some, and then he involved all of us in these papers. So he involved us like either writing or just having some ideas of future experiment that we could do once we were able to do experiments again. So then was good for us with this perspective.
So
So
your
I
lab,
think
I was going to say, so
yeah,
your
go
lab
ahead.
was shut down for how long at the
I
beginning
think
of the pandemic?
I think we were able to come back in April,
Okay.
but in this kind of shift, you know.
Shift work.
But
Hmm.
yeah, shift work. So theoretically, we're supposed to be still in shift work, but we are yeah we're just coming to do whatever we need to do, and then if you need to write or just do data analysis, most of the time we go home and do work from
Okay.
home. Personality. So sorry. In my personal experiments, I do most of the experiments that I was doing by that time was mouse experiment. I do a lot of mouse experiments for our cancer research, and then for me wasn't that much challenging because even if in the lab we need to be like just two in the tissue culture room, even if we have four hood. So I was in a place that I could be by myself, just me and my friends, my mice, and
That's
then
great.
for me was good. So I have a very optimistic point of view. I think was good at this time. So
So it
yeah,
was disruptive at the beginning, and then you found a way to do at least some in hospital or in lab work, and then
yes,
still write. And you were in a unique position because you had already been in the lab for almost a full year, if not a full year. And so you had some of your data, and you had a bit of work that you could continue when you were sent home.
yes, absolutely. So it was a good time to put things together and having a different perspective. So for the way that you can see your data. So if you look your data today, you have one storytelling, and then if you look the same data in 2 or 3 weeks or 2 months, you have different storytelling based on papers that you read. So I think was good to have things in this way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Janessa, I'd like to get your perspective about how, because you also work in some bench environment, but also do some mixed studies with humans, with babies.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again for having me. So yeah, I kind of wear 3 different hats in my position here. So I'm a clinician, so I see cases on the clinic floor, dogs and cats. I teach in both the didactic and clinical teaching for our veterinary students. And then I'm also a researcher. And I have projects that are pretty diverse that go from the benchtop all the way to clinical trials in veterinary patients to we're looking at and following infants in a daycare setting, looking at how microbiome changes in them may change disease susceptibility and outcomes. So, so I have a lot of different types of projects that are going on right now. And when COVID hit, I actually had just started and converted from a clinical position to my tenure track position. And I was so excited and had tons of motivation to really launch everything. I had just gotten my lab space cleared out. I had just gotten all my quotes and all my equipment was ready to order and ready to come. And March 12th hit, and I realized March 13th that my son at the time, 2-year-old, his daycare was closing. He goes to Nysonger, affiliate with Wexner, and he is medically fragile. He's got a congenital heart defect and special needs associated with it. And when his daycare shut down, our world kind of stopped, as everyone's did. My husband is also a tenure track faculty member in the College of Engineering at OSU, and we were faced that Friday with the realization that we were going to have to manage both of our tenure track positions while managing our little guy at home. And so the way that we coped with that is we took 2-hour shifts at home to manage so we didn't both get behind. And so he would work for 2 hours while I watched the little guy, and then we'd trade off, and we did that every day. So we started our morning at about 6 a.m. and we would finish some of our meetings with our trainees at like 10, 11 o'clock at night so that we could try and get a full work weekend and not fall too far behind, but also provide care to our little guy. And I was also pregnant at the time. So we had a lot of added carried stress because at the time, nobody knew the effects of COVID on women that were pregnant. And we also didn't know what the impacts were going to be to our little guy that has a congenital heart defect. And so we worked together with my department head and my service head and figured out a way to pull me off of the clinic floor because I had weeks of clinics that were coming up, and the team worked very well of getting me off of clinics and putting me on a remote clinic system. So that part we could solve, that I could do clinics all remotely to try and protect our family from exposure. And my research stuff really halted. I actually have a colony of felines that were here and ready to go. We had experiments that were planned to start at the end of March, and all those got shut down and put on hold. We actually couldn't restart animal experiments until early summer. So unfortunately, those guys were just in holding here in our lab animal facility. We had multiple clinical trials that my group was getting ready to launch that had to go on hold because our hospital population had changed to just clinical patients, so an emergency based only. And that was to limit people coming into our building exposure for our medical teams. And so I basically had all that stuff halt in my research program, and I had to really pivot and focus on spending a lot of time figuring out how to cohort our medical team so that we could protect our residents but still provide quality care to our patients, and pivoting with our teaching, where we transitioned to all online teaching for our preclinical students, and even trying to come up with online training clinical experiences, because for a period of time our 4th year students were no longer in the clinics, yet their clock for accreditation and training was ticking. And so a lot of my stuff before I went on maternity leave had to shift to that. since then, and since coming back from maternity leave, things are slowly starting to pick up. A couple of our clinical trials are slowly recruiting patients in based on the number of cases that we can see in the hospital. We're able to do lab animal research. We were able to start our infant project at the OSU daycares with very strict guidelines because of COVID, but we are slowly getting that. That project is underway, and we are collecting samples. So I feel like things are slowly starting to get back to productivity is what I would say.
Yes. I thought it was interesting. I think your point about, some of the challenges for our faculty who have clinical expectations and teaching as well as research, and the need to really, the famous, or I think most quote word is pivot for 2020 to be able to accommodate the remote learning and students and continue in that role. And sometimes that superseded being able to do the work we needed to do in the lab, I know.
Yeah.
I thought it was also interesting, and I appreciate you sharing your personal experiences too. And I want to kind of circle back to all of you about that in a second as well. But the fact that, some of the challenges now have switched to getting supplies and your -80 freezers.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, so we have another project that we received funding for to look at FMT, fecal microbiotransplant, and parvovirus in dogs. And it's a partnership with a local shelter, and we need a -80 freezer at the facility to launch the project. And right now, March is looking like the earliest that we'll be able to see one, but it could be longer. They've already warned us. And so although we have funding, we have people, we have dogs, we're ready to go. Some of our basic supplies like -80 freezers, but even as simple as like cryo vials, the prices have doubled, and some of my orders just continuing to go get pushed back for delivery dates. So some of the things that I took for granted and used to just think were so easy to get, like gloves and cryo vials and reagents, are really challenging to get right now, and are actually changing some of my timelines for projects just because of supplies. So.
Well, thanks so much for sharing some of your experience and how that's evolved over time. I want to hear a little bit too from Ariel Sheftal about, because she does a lot of work directly with children and families, and how her research has been affected. Ariel, can you share a bit?
Sure. So let's see. So it was kind of one of those stories where you hoped would never happen ever in life. And I think that's how all people would actually look at this pandemic that we are currently in. I have had very hefty goals in terms of getting tenure and getting projects and getting R01s in and getting, all of these manuscripts written, and trying to make sure that I was meeting these goals so that I would be ready to rock and roll come 21. I was going to have everything under control. Well, that didn't happen. So my lab actually, we actually recruit families that have 6 to 12-year-old kids, and we do in-person, face-to-face appointments. And obviously that was not going to happen. March 13th was our last appointment, and we shut down. And we did not actually start back up with face-to-face appointments until November. So needless to say, it's been quite a struggle, to be honest. And a lot of what we've had to do in terms of changing our protocols to meet all of the COVID-19 protocols. So when we meet families, are garbed from head to toe in PPE, which we hope and pray that does not scare families. But we do give them forewarning to let them know what they're going to be seeing when they see us. But it did take a toll, obviously. But I will definitely say, I also, like Marcelo, like to look on the positive side of things. So I was able to write papers. I was able to get tons of video coding data done to actually do that. I submitted an R01 in June, even though it did not get funded. It actually did get a score. So I got feedback and plan on resubmitting that in March. So there were positives that did occur. And also on the family side, I would say when it first happened, my child's daycare, I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. So school shut down. So I had to be a 2nd grade teacher. And then the daycare shut down. So I had to be a preschool teacher on top of a 2nd grade teacher and do my job. So my husband also, he works for a bank. And when you work for a bank in the capacity that he does, there's not a lot of wiggle room, to be honest, with his schedule. He's in back-to-back meetings. So unfortunately, some of the childcare fell on my lap, which again, that's okay. We adjusted as best as we could. So every corner in my downstairs was a something corner. So I had an arts and crafts corner. I had an ABC corner. I had a numbers corner. I had something going on to kind of keep my 4-year-old busy, to be honest. We relied a lot on YouTube, which I am okay with saying in terms of like teaching her, numbers and alphabet and words. She wasn't just sitting there in front of the TV all day. So we would do art projects, and I was doing that on top of trying to manage a lab and also helping my 2nd grader finish 2nd grade. So you can probably imagine my work-life balance was very much shifted. And I was getting up at 5:30 in the morning. I am a very avid working out person, so I had to work out to keep my stress levels as low as possible. So I'd work out for 30 minutes and get my shower in and then get to work with the kids and get, as much as I could get done for myself in terms of my job. And then it was kid time. And then once my husband was off of work, he took over, and then I would work until about 11 to midnight, just depending on what was going on. So it was definitely a struggle. And even making that decision to actually have her go back was a struggle as well. That was a big struggle for me and my husband to kind of figure out, okay, we know this is going to be good for her because it'll give her social involvement with other children, with other people besides just me, her, and her brother and her dad. However, we were so scared, to be honest, about, okay, are they taking the precautions? Are they doing everything necessary? And finally, on August 31st, we decided, okay, we're going to do this because we thought that we felt safe enough and talked it over and over and over with the daycare director about what their methods were and how they were keeping kids safe and what they were doing. So we felt good about sending her to preschool and having someone that was actually qualified to teach her.
To care for her, yes.
No.
I think I appreciate you sharing that. I think many parents, and I've heard this story over and over again, is just how do you tag team? How do you shift your schedule around when your kids were doing their work and when you had to do your work early in the morning or late in the evenings? And I think, a lot of the concerns that I started to see from faculty, everyone kind of was in crisis mode and just doing what they needed to do initially. And then at the end of the summer, I think I saw that realization hit when daycares were opening up and there was that dilemma about, do I send my kids back to school? How is this going to look? And the realization for parents of school-age kids that, oh my gosh, they might not be in school. This is going to be longer than just a short little, couple months of homeschooling or trying to entertain my kids during the summer. I'm going to have to think about the long haul.
Yeah.
And that I think has been a big challenge. I feel like, at least in my conversations with faculty now, we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. And as you all said, I love that you all are optimists and you found ways to continue to be productive during all of this. I wanted to just, before we switch over to our leaders on our panel, just wanted to talk a little bit about what concerns or thoughts do you have for yourself or for your colleagues about the lasting effects of the COVID pandemic on your academic pathway and career? I'm wondering if, Marcella, would you like to kind of talk about this from the postdoc perspective? Because I feel like postdocs have a very time-limited amount to be successful, and then they're out on the job market. And we've seen that a lot of the jobs are not there right now or frozen.
Yeah, so can you just repeat was cutting a little bit. I
Can you
couldn't hear
can
that.
you talk about maybe the lasting effects or concerns you might have about how the pandemic may affect your career path?
Yeah, I think, well, we could be more productive during this time, right? Because I think our biggest concern is like for a postdoc position is, well, I need to be productive and I need to send papers out. So for in order to have these papers, I need to get experiments done and then to be able to do analysis and everything. So if you are not able to do all of these things together, so you'll not be able to put papers out, right? So this was a big concern from my side, but thank God, as I mentioned, so I love things. So you guys will see that I'm very biased when I'm talking about him. So for me, he's really smart, and then he's always trying to help people. And then, okay, the way that he thought was, I have some papers here. I will not be able to work on that by myself. So I will use my lab people to work on that, and then to give me some other perspective, or just to be able to walk a little bit with them this paper, and then I can just do the final review. So I think with that was helpful. I think I ended up being in we are in a process of two papers that wasn't mine, and then beside to that, just another two came in my lab. So I think not being mine, so in a COVID time. So I think this is a really good thing. I was really
You
blessed
found
from
some
that.
ways. It sounds like you found some ways to use some existing data and to be creative about maintaining your productivity for now. And you're in a lucky position where you weren't on the job market necessarily this year, although you've done many years of postdoc and are working toward becoming more independent, right?
Yeah, that's true. So I did share with you that this is my third or fourth postdoc. I think it's the fourth, right? I was
Yes.
talking with you. So yeah, I did one postdoc in Brazil. So that's was right after PhD. In Brazil, we have this kind of things pretty normal. When you finish and then you have some data to put together, you can ask for a postdoc for a short period of time. And then I did this. Was my first postdoc. So then I came to US to Columbus as well. I did 1 year and a half with a fellowship that came from Brazil. So then I was forced to go back to Brazil as a way to pay back all of my fellowship. This is pretty normal. And then, so that was my second postdoc. I went back to Brazil. I did the third postdoc, and this is the fourth postdoc.
Well, we're glad
So
you're with us, even,
yeah,
even
so
though
I'm
it's
glad
been
to
a
be
lot of
here.
back and forth.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I really like Columbus. So this is the second time that we are here.
Great.
So, and then, yeah, I'm looking forward for next step. So, yeah, so, and then this is really important to be productive. And then we are doing our best. So, and then just to add one more thing, besides to COVID, for us, minority. So I'm twice minority, right? I'm Black and I'm Brazilian. So being a minority during a COVID, especially when George Floyd happened, for me as a husband and having a pregnant woman was really tough because she was all the time worried about myself. So if I could not forget to text her while I arrived, or while I was driving or something like that, or just I arrived, I'm leaving from here, because she was really worried. So I think was we had two things to occupy our mind, right? Besides COVID. So
I think
really
that's a,
challenging.
yes, I'm really glad you brought that up. And I think this is something that we've talked about with our faculty and trainees, that, you know, there is a disproportionate effect, and a lot of the challenges and stress we faced with the COVID pandemic were happening in concert with some of the social justice issues and the police shootings. And we know that our faculty of color are already dealing with racism and economic inequities, and then on top of that, they're also we're finding more health disparities in terms of who COVID affects, that they're disproportionately more likely to be losing a loved one or have family members or themselves become infected with COVID. So I appreciate you bringing up that this has multiple layers to it that many of our faculty have been dealing with. In the interest of time, I do want to switch a little bit, and I hope maybe Ariel and Janessa can kind of chime in too about their experiences. And because I know both of you in the midst of this have taken time for having a baby during your tenure clock, as well as a COVID year, which was offered. I'd like if Dr. Derman and Dr. Oberreisen can talk a little bit about what has been the institutional response and how we're supporting our faculty and trainees to get through this phase. And particularly, how do we continue to help them maintain productivity and not widen that gap, particularly for our women and our faculty and trainees of color. Dennis, would you be willing to start?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Cindy, for inviting me, and thank you all for sharing your stories. They were quite compelling, and I think illustrated what I saw among our faculty at the Abigail Wexner Research Institute in the immediate response to this crisis was an extraordinary commitment and dedication and passion for the work that our faculty are doing here, and an extraordinary resilience and sort of sense of innovation at trying to adapt to this kind of very fluid and challenging work situation. Each of you told your own version of that story, which I found really quite compelling. And I saw it, anecdotally across our entire research institute. I'd say from an institutional standpoint, the acute early stage response to the pandemic in mid-March was to shut everything down. And that was, of course, done in the name of safety. And so we were trying to balance this overriding priority for faculty and staff and employees' safety against trying to not completely undermine faculty's ability to continue to work in some way, shape, or form to be productive. So, I think, first of all, the hospital instituted a number of kind of furlough and COVID relief strategies that provided immediate financial security to really all hospital staff, including all the research institute staff. I think I'm accurate in saying that we did not lose a single employee during this period of time who lost their job and couldn't get it back, which I'm particularly proud of. It was an overriding priority for us to maintain people's teams, not knowing how long this was going to last, at least during the acute phase. And the hospital kind of phased their response to it, but we successfully were able to essentially keep everybody's team intact. And then the other guiding principle we had, certainly in the Research Institute, was really just to provide maximum flexibility to allow faculty to create whatever work environment worked for them within the constraints of the requirements we had. So there was an 8-week period of time where nobody could really be on site to be doing work, with a few notable exceptions. And some of those exceptions, for example, were we did allow faculty to come in to do assessments of animals in order to keep animal research moving. We couldn't start new experiments, but we allowed outcome assessments and blood draws and things of that nature. And the animal resources core staff were here in a kind of part-time alternating shift schedule basis, but we maintained the health and welfare of all of our research animals. We did not lose a single animal that needed to be sacrificed in response to this. And I think, we were able to just maintain enough activity so that the value of the animals was preserved. And the same went with the wet bench operations as well. And Cindy, you know better than anybody else, and Ariel, that really our clinical researchers just had to convert completely to a remote work environment and are largely still doing that today. So one of the transition points, Cindy, you mentioned, that occurred in the summer when we realized that we had weathered the acute storm, but we were now kind of transitioning into a long-term maintenance phase of our response. And one of the things we've done, and again, this maybe reflects a pediatric research institution where everybody really does work well together as a team. At an institutional level, our clinical investigators, I asked to largely remain remote for another 6 to 12 months, so that we could leverage their workspaces for our faculty and staff who had to be on site to do their work. So our wet bench researchers are still working under space constraints. So they needed more physical space to basically spread out to do their non-bench work. And our clinical investigators essentially volunteered large sections of their space to be used by their colleagues for the next 6 to 12 months. And so, you know, that sort of spirit of cooperation and collaboration across the faculty, we really relied on to come up with these long-term sustainable solutions. And, you know, we've been talking about the potentially disproportionate impact of this pandemic on junior faculty. And I think we've heard examples of that. Marcelo, you're in a mature lab that had data available that you could spend 8 weeks analyzing data, writing papers, writing new grants. Ariel, I'm happy to hear you got your R01 in June. But, you know, for more junior people, this has really been a struggle to launch. I mean, Janessa, you know, you've encountered all the challenges of trying to launch a research career during this time. And I am concerned about when you launch your trajectory a little bit lower than maybe you had initially, what is that trajectory going to look like over the long term? And all I can say is it's something that we are acutely aware of here and are starting to put some mechanisms in place to be able to track that over time. And, you know, I'll be interested in hearing what Tatiana has to say about how the university is thinking about whether they're going to place an asterisk next to, you know, faculty's names at some point. Is the year 2020 always going to have an asterisk associated with it? And is there some way we're going to recalibrate expectations for faculty at certain milestones in their career? That to me, that's an open question.
I think that's important. Yes, I think from an operations perspective, it's been really important to hear your perspective, Dennis, and how you managed that and kept faculty productive. But it would be great to hear from Dr. Obersen about how this is being viewed from a promotion and tenure perspective. Can you share some of your
Thank you
thoughts?
so much for inviting me, and for your stories were very compelling. And I think, you know, the College of Medicine did very similar things to what Nationwide Children's Hospital did in response to the pandemic in terms of the research and clinical space as well. So I think we were pretty aligned there. As far as PNT, I can tell you that I have spent hours in meetings at the university level with colleges across the university, trying to come up with not only how annual reviews will take place this year and what information do you need to provide for your annual reviews, and how to couch chairs, how to evaluate faculty progress this year, but also in terms of thinking about promotion and tenure. And I can tell you that asterisk is not just going to last this year, because we're not even done. We're not even through it yet. So it's not just 2020. We're in, you know, 2021, or the extension of 2020, as some people like to call it. And so the impact of this year and a half, 2 years, is going to be ongoing for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And so this is not an isolated year where you can say, after this, everything's just going to go back to normal, because it's going to take time for all of you three to get ramped back up in a way that you were working before. And so discussions are ongoing in terms of dossier preparation and how to handle this. And we're still having those conversations. We still haven't really come to a firm consensus yet. But what we do know is that we are asking department chairs, when they do annual reviews, to ask faculty if they want to put in a COVID statement, and encouraging departments to have COVID statements, however faculty want to do it. Do they want to do it based on the different areas, scholarship, teaching, research, administrative service, or do they just want to write a general narrative and to share whatever they want to share? So there's no metrics as to what you have to share with your chair, but whatever it is you want to explain as to how COVID has impacted your progress over this last year, and what do you think it'll impact your goals for the next year? Because the annual reviews usually have goals for the upcoming year. Well, whatever goals you had last year more than likely went out the window the moment we shut down in March, right? And so now the goals that you would normally have for next year are also out the window. So to have that conversation and really get information to help us then better understand too, what can the college and university do in terms of supporting all of the things that are now, completely derailed? Because for us to be able to move forward, we really need the data, right?
Right.
Researcher, but we need the data so that we know where the pain points continue to be and where you see them coming in down the road. So
I think it's really helpful to hear, and I had not heard about the little COVID explanation, and I love that being able to kind of talk through what your story is, because as we've heard, the stories are all different. I know also that faculty are reluctant to speak up because a lot of them don't want special treatment, particularly women in our faculty of color. And I wonder what types of processes might already be in place at the organizational level or the institutional level to make sure we're monitoring the progress of our faculty, or if our panelists maybe have some suggestions about things that might be helpful to them. I know at Nationwide, we have a process where we annually review the salaries and try and close the gap for women in our faculty of color, for example, so that there's equity. Are there
I was going to mention that, Cindy. We have been in a process for a couple of years now, both in the Research Institute and more broadly in the Department of Pediatrics, to do a line-by-line examination of every salary of every faculty member by rank, gender, and minority majority status. Because number one, the baseline keeps shifting. And so somebody who joins the faculty this year may actually be making more money than somebody who joined 2 years ago, just because the market has shifted. And so we're always looking to ensure we've got equity, certainly at the entry level part of the pipeline, but then as people have differential experiences and opportunities for advancement, we want to make sure that we can on an annual basis assess whether everyone is getting an equal opportunity to advance along the same pathway. And I think the pandemic will be yet another influencer that we'll now introduce into our assessment to see, is there any evidence from a salary and productivity standpoint that it's disproportionately affecting different groups of the faculty? So it's good that we have that system in place. And we're also beginning to track manuscript submissions, not just publications, but submissions, so that we can track that. We're going to try to go back to 2019 and then do an assessment at 20 and then kind of carry it forward to see if we can systematically look for evidence of disproportional impact on productivity in different groups of faculty.
Yeah, we've been going through a salary review process for the last about year and a half for equity, to look at exactly the same thing, to look line by line and see which departments are doing well, which departments need a little bit of a better deep dive into the salaries of their faculty for exactly the same reason. Times change and sometimes cost of living does not keep up with what the changes are. And you may have a senior faculty member here who's a woman who's making much less than somebody who's just starting. And so we are actively in the process. Several departments have already done equity raises for their faculty to get them on track. One of the things that I think came out of this last year, as tumultuous as it was, is really a much deeper understanding of the disparity that exists. I think a lot of people who kind of knew it, maybe thought about it, but didn't really pay attention to it. I think it really brought it much more to the forefront. And there's a lot more conversation about that and a lot more acknowledgement that it actually exists. That yes, women are not making the same as men. And yes, women don't get published as much as men or run the clinical trials as much as men, perhaps. And that is an area that now we do need to pay more attention to. It's no longer something that's kind of skirting off in the shadows, but really has been front and center, which, as horrible as this year was in many ways, that could be a very positive thing that we, looking to you, all of you who are being optimistic and positive about this year, that hopefully we can take away from it as a positive, one of the positive things that we can then use to move forward in a much more open-eyed way than we have been, perhaps.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great to hear. I'm wondering if our panelists have any additional comments or thoughts? It sounds like Janessa, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something there because I think we talked about kind of the acute phase and now we're switching to this new normal. And I'll be honest, the new normal for me, just in my personal life, still is very challenging. My daycare for the boys is not open full time. So we're having to coordinate between my husband and I because of my son's medical condition. Like we can't get, we don't feel comfortable having a nanny anymore. So productivity time that I used to have on the weekends with extra coverage is just not even a possibility. And I told you about some of just the research stuff of like basic things like equipment are delaying things, and so I think that this idea that we are through the acute, but now we're settling into this chronic. For me, I am a goal setter. And like everyone said, my goals for 2020 went out the window, right? And that changes then my 3-year goal, my 5-year goal, my 10-year goal, even for trajectories for projects or my research portfolio and pillars of my lab that I was trying to build. And I had a KO8 that got scored very, very well, just missed the pay line. And my plan was to get it in March. And in full disclosure, like that's probably not going to happen because of all these personal life delays with not having the coverage that I need with that extra time that I used to work, and so having to change and look at those and lean on my mentors to help me to do that. And I think, the vet school set up very well to provide mentorship in those areas. But I think that that's something that it's comforting to hear that the university understands that it's not just this 1 year and that the trajectory and ramping up again is almost twice as hard because we still don't have all the resources that we need, right? Like it's like kind of you're chasing after that goal. It's right there, but you don't have everything to meet that. So it's good to hear. And I think for me, and I told this to Cynthia when we chatted, I've been trying not to stress about that and focus on the things that I can do and areas that I can build and try to give myself grace, right? Like it's not gonna all be the exact outcome that I thought it was gonna be or the exact same trajectory. It's going to be a detour and that's okay, right? As long as, the straight line that I have projected is not going to be that way. It's going to take some curves, but I'm still going to get to the top of the mountain, right? And it's just figuring out how to do that and to give myself grace in this period of trying to figure out how to do it.
I love that sentiment, Janessa, and I appreciate that you brought that up again. I was going to ask you about that because I do think that the whole year has been a lesson in giving yourself some grace and really just trying to at least go with the flow as much as we could.
Yeah.
Ariel, do you have anything to say?
I was going to say also, the one thing that I have been very motivated to remind myself is that it's okay to not be okay. And I know that sounds very corny, but it's very true. There was moments in time where I had to just sit down and cry. And that was okay. And I had to be in that space and be okay with the fact that I'm crying because this is a lot to take in, a lot that's happening at this time. And I just needed that moment to be in that space. So it was always, and I've been very encouraged that I wasn't the only one that felt that way, and I was able to have that support of my husband and also friends to be mindful that this space that we're in is not normal, and it probably won't be normal for a very, 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 very long time, and that it's okay to not be okay. And that was just something I had to always remind myself of, and that all things are going to work out for my good, even in the midst of all of this, that in the end, like Janessa was saying, there's going to be detours, and I know that's going to be the case. I just have to remind myself of that. And I think that was really important, not only for my physical health, but also my mental health as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Ariel. I agree. I think it's a really important point. I wanted to switch and allow some of our audience to have some questions, because one of them kind of connects to that in terms of we're not only caring for ourselves, but we're also trying to care for our labs and maintain social connectedness and the mental health of the people that we're mentoring. Do you all want to talk a little bit about how you've done that?
Cindy, could I ask you to comment on that? Because from my perspective, I think you're doing it better than almost anyone. We've got some groups here that have really tried to stimulate some, what I would call more local wellness and, team support activities to stay connected in whatever way they can. I think your team is one of those that has done that as well or better than most. I mean, what have you done to promote that?
Well, I mean, I think like many people, we've quickly converted to Zoom and all of our, online types of things, but we've tried to be creative about how we, normally we'd have center picnics and holiday parties and, seminars. And we find that a lot of our scientific creativity comes from that in-person connection. And you just, you leave a seminar and something sparks a thought and you're talking to the person that was sitting next to you and you have a whole new idea for a grant. And I think we miss that terribly. And I don't say that, I don't think we have that figured out completely, but we've worked very hard on I have regular lab chats with all the labs in my center where we used to have lunch every month. And now I meet with a lab and we just have a little chat via Zoom to hear about how they're doing, what kinds of things they're doing to take care of themselves, how they're managing, what can we as a center do to support them better. We've also been, each summer we have an influx of trainees, as I think many centers do, and new RAs or coordinators. And we actually started to connect the labs with each other because oftentimes they're teaching each other when we're in the same physical space. But we've had them connecting with each other as an additional way of having social contact. And then the last thing I'll say is that we've had an amazing response to some of the anti-racism movement in the labs. And we have amazing young folks that have really been given the opportunity to just take some of their initiatives and ideas in the center and run with them. So we've been having book clubs and discussions and developing new methods for how to engage some of our colleagues who are really hurting during this time. And I think it's been a really important part of healing and moving forward. But I would like to hear about how others are doing that as well, because this is just a little.
Add something. Can I add something?
Yes,
So
please.
here in our you mentioned something nice. So in the beginning of the pandemic, they start to do lab checking every day. So every day we have kind of maximum 10 to 15 minutes talk. And he was checking with everyone. He was concerned about our mental health, just to check if everyone was safe. And then so just to in the beginning, just to give a peace of mind that we'll be able to go through this. So, and then now people from CCBD, actually people from RITA, that's a Research Institute Training Affairs, they start to do a briefing and meditation section. So I think this is really nice for us to relieve stress. So Ariel mentioned that she needs to work out. I need to work out as well, but now with the like pandemic, so and then as Janissa mentioned, so we didn't know how was COVID with pregnant woman. Me and my wife, we were scared to work out. So breathing and meditation is something that's helping us just to, having 5 minutes, like forget everything that's happening. So I know that the world is falling apart, but just have 5 minutes for yourself. Then you can go back to your crazy life again. So, but then you, in the middle of this craziness, you remember that if you breathe, you put your things together, and then you'll be able to do things or to see things in a different perspective. This is something that's really nice that they started. And then I also proposed to them, well, if when COVID finished, we can do this like in a park, just like during the lunchtime, just to have connection, because it's really good to have this kind of 10-15 minutes of briefing meditation. It was really helpful. Just something that is happening.
I really appreciate, Marcella, you sharing that with me. And I know you spoke with me about how your spiritual life and developing personal supports outside. Being an international trainee is sometimes hard because you don't have your family close by and your typical support system. And I really appreciated you sharing that earlier.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, so I mentioned to Cynthia that for me also having, so I'm Christian, so having a spiritual life for me matters a lot. So sometimes you have no friend to talk with, and then sometimes you just think that your friend will not think that what you are going through matters. So you just go and talk with God. So and then God will bring peace, and most of the time He gives peace to myself. So and then yeah, this is something that helps to me. So yeah, thank you for remind me about this.
Cynthia,
Yes.
I think one thing that I've tried to do is just ask people, what does support look like for you? How can I support you right now? Because what I might be feeling or perceive a way that I can support them might not be what they actually need right now in this moment. And so I think for my residents and for my trainees, my graduate students, just being very direct, more direct than I would even normally be, is what does support look like for you in this moment? And how can I help you with what you're dealing with at work and at home? Because I think we sometimes lose that or think that we have an idea of what someone needs, and it's not really what they need.
Yeah, it's hard to predict much of anything correctly in this time. We've learned that for sure, but I appreciate that. I think it is everybody's going through their, as I said at the very beginning, we're all in the same storm, but a different boat. And what you need in that boat may be different than your partner or your colleague or your trainee. So I appreciate
One of the
that.
things that I'd like to remind everybody is that we do have the employee assistance program.
Thank you.
Right?
Yes.
That you can reach out to, which is confidential services if you need to talk to somebody just acutely, or you can come up with set up a 10 or so meetings with a counselor. So somebody completely impartial who's there to help you. It's free and it's something you really should take opportunity. Sometimes you just need to talk to somebody who doesn't know you, right?
Mhm.
Who can't put their perception of you on top of you. You just need someone completely impartial to just have a conversation with, and you feel so much better. And so I'd encourage everybody who may be struggling or who just wants to talk to somebody to reach out. Just look it up, and that's available to everybody. And I think if they've been busy, so they're doing their job. So I think it's important to take care of yourself, because this is hard at all levels. It is hard at all levels for everybody. And some days are good days and other days are not so good days. And you have to, as you said, you have to be kind to yourself, right? It's not a straight path. It's a curved path. Success rarely is a straight path anyway. And this is just extra curvy. We've got some real curves going on this year. And so, embracing that and really being kind to yourself is really important.
And thanks for bringing that up, Tatiana, because we have similar resources here at the hospital for those who might be listening in and are based at Children's Hospital, employee assistance programs, the You Matter team from HR, lots of institutional resources to support people through this. I would echo your comments.
Well, I think on that note, I don't see any other additional questions, and I believe we're out of time, but I just want to really share my appreciation of this wonderful panel. I knew we were going to have a great discussion, and we surely did. And as a resilience researcher, I really appreciate that we have folks talking about the positives of this and how they've adapted and made it work, but also recognizing that resilience doesn't mean it's not hard. And in fact, that's part of the equation, that part of being resilient is that you've gone through the stress and that it is a tough road, but you find a way to still be successful and adapt and make it work. So I think this is a great example of that, and that it does take reaching out and getting hope, as Dennis and I were talking about, tackling this issue from multiple levels, not just your own personal grace and what you're doing in your lab to adapt and care for others, but also from the institutional level and from your personal support. So thank you so much for all your time today. And I'm sure the audience really appreciated it as well. And everyone have a good day.
Thanks for organizing it, Cindy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And so just like I started at the beginning, 3 short weeks ago. We've now come to the end of our annual scientific meeting. I hope that all of you have learned a tremendous amount of lessons from the individuals here at The Ohio State University and Nationwide Children's, as well as our colleagues across the CTSA consortium. I think that COVID-19 pandemic has certainly put challenges and opportunities in front of us. And those approaches that all of us have adopted, that approach towards pivoting, remaining nimble, while staying true to our course of improving human health, ultimately will result in new approaches for us to be able to use to enhance the way that we conduct our science, that we work together as teams, and importantly, that we develop the next generation of clinical and translational scientists. I want to turn the program over for a second to Dr. Guy Brock, who actually was the facilitator for the poster award to announce the poster award winners from day 2. Guy?
Thank you, Becky. Yes, so first of all, I just want to thank everyone that submitted a poster. I appreciate the time that you took to do this, and especially with now our new technology being virtual. I know it is some extra work to figure that out and take the time to do recording. So I appreciate it. First of all, just all those who submitted. And then secondly, I really want to thank the reviewers who took the time to view all the posters, go to the panel and ask questions. Without your volunteering your time, this wouldn't have been possible. So do you want to announce the poster winners? Maybe I'll, the best way is just to share my screen. Okay, so, there's nice prizes for first, second, and third place of $500, $300, and $200 respectively, travel awards. And so in advance, please excuse my mispronunciations. I'm sure there will be a few, but I will do my best. All right, so we have 3 different categories. One, research staff, postdoctoral fellow. Another, second one is graduate student, and the third is faculty and research scientist. And so I'll go through these. So in first place for the research staff, postdoctoral fellow is Kristen Heitman for her poster Dietary Patterns in the United States, Quality of Snacks Certified by Race and Ethnicity. In second place is Timothy Horn for his poster Behavioral Consequences of the COVID-19 Pandemic and Associations with Family Functioning in Very Preterm Children and Term Controls. And in third place is Kristen Gumper for her poster Plasma Fatty Acid Composition in Treatment-Naive Metastatic Pancreatic Cancer Patients is associated with clinical indicators of cachexia. Now for the graduate student category, in first place we have Janik Walker for her poster Simultaneous Disruption of XPO1 and AA20 activity in B cells influences both B and T cell repertoire. Second place is Zihan Lin for his poster Learning Causal Survival Effects When the Cox Model Fails. And third place, Xizhen Zhao with the poster Identification of Age Risks and Drug Adverse Event Pairs. And the final category, faculty and research scientists. In first place, we have Ian Davis for his poster Liponucleotides Improve Gas Exchange in Dogs with Aspiration Pneumonia. Second place is Namal Leonage for the poster Unique Immune Signatures Predict Potential Cardiometabolic Risk in Severe COVID-19 Patients in COVID-19 Recovered Animals. And in third place, Aubrey Moe with the poster Brain Behavior Mechanisms of Social Cognition in First Episode Schizophrenia, a KL2 project in progress. So I'm going to hand back over to Becky, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. So congratulations to all of our winners, but also congratulations to all of you who participated. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our planning committee. These are our program managers, program directors, and leadership of the Center for Clinical and Translational Science, who really put together the time and the effort to bring together the programs and the activities that you've been involved with for the past 3 weeks. I'd encourage all of you to also let your friends know about the fact that these are all recorded and will be available on the CCTS website. And so if there were things that you were unable to attend due to conflict, certainly all of us are busy and it's tough to put aside 4 to 5 hours across 3 Tuesdays. Please direct individuals there for them to be able to see these. On behalf of the Center of Clinical and Translational Science, our leadership, our partners at Nationwide Children's Hospital, the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, the Office of Research, and our CCTS, thank you for attending. Take care, be healthy, and we look forward to working together with you over the coming years to support your careers and your trajectories in clinical and translational science. Goodbye.